And so Ezra is writing to the people that were exiled, right? And he's going back and recalling the events that occurred that we read about in First, Second Kings, First, Second Samuel. And I was thinking, Octavio, that someone might not understand, why do we have to read the same old thing again? Why does Ezra write the same thing that's already written there? But when Ezra was writing, there was no Bible all put together. There were writings. There were prophets. There was a writing by this prophet and that prophet. He didn't have like a King James Old Testament to stick up and say this. That all didn't exist.
Maybe he had the annals of the kings.
He did. He had many things. He had the annals. He had. We listed them. I think last week we listed all the sources that he pulled from. So he had stuff, and he was pulling from all those things. But I started thinking it might be kind of confusing to understand why are we hearing the same thing that we already we read in First, Second Kings, First, Second Samuel. But that's why, because now this Ezra, he's rewriting it. He doesn't have that whole thing in a big set like we have, a Bible like we have. And he's writing specifically to these people who are coming back and don't remember or know. 66 years they were gone, 70 by the time they started coming back. When Daniel was in the book of Daniel, we read about when Cyrus, king of Persia, was king, and Daniel was in that serving under him, and that was when Daniel realized it had been 66 years, and he was reading, was it Nehemiah or Jeremiah the prophet, about the 70 years that they would be gone, and then all of a sudden we don't hear much from Daniel anymore. And then we read this story about how Cyrus was reading through the old books and found this this prophecy that said that they would be going back out of exile. Well, how did Cyrus just so happen to read about that? How did that just so happen to happen? So a lot of scholars believe Daniel was about that, about showing the king that this prophecy was there. And King Cyrus, out of the good nature of his heart, because he just loves the Jewish people, he decides to send the exiles back because he and different rulers then after him realized that they could make money off those people. If they would send them back to their own land and they build up those cities and towns, then they could pay taxes and he could make some change off of them instead of having them as slaves in all these other places that he did. So he did that. And then later in history, we see other kings that did the same thing, that conquered people groups and then later sent them back. And then that way they could make money off of them. So Ezra's telling the story to these people who've kind of lost track of who they are. So we see a lot of genealogies, right? Now in this section, we're going to see a lot of the details about the building of the temple. So we're going to go through it a little bit and remind ourselves about the issue of what was the tabernacle and then now the temple. And so that's what we're focusing on now. Ezra is retelling the history of kings, focusing on David and Solomon. So by the time we get to where the prophets come in, it's going to be bam, bam, bam. There's the kings are going to go really fast in Chronicles, because he doesn't really focus on that. His biggest focus is on what David and then Solomon did. And Solomon builds the temple that David designed. David was told by God he could not build the temple, that God would not bless that. And so David planned everything, gathered all the stuff, and it was Solomon's job to build it. Of course, when David was king, when he was around and David's empire, see the red part there? That's kind of the loose confederation of Israelites that represented David's kingdom. It took a while for it to actually be a kingdom. They had some squabbles between them and kind of different things happened. Some of the sons rebelled and whatever. We read all about that before. So David just barely kind of got them together for this kingdom. And then Solomon it got bigger under Solomon's rule. So David and Solomon, eventually they had the actual lines and boundaries of where their kingdom was. But Solomon did much more than that. He had a great tool that he used he would marry as women all over the place and make trade agreements with all their fathers. So if they had a prominent father, he'd marry that lady. He ended up having, was it 1,000, 700? 700 wives and 300 concubines, I think. Because, 700 might just not be enough. So then he comes over here, and we see all these trade routes that come up through Israel. And Solomon made Israel known for its trade and the trade passing through the area. And he would make deals with the different people groups that were passing through. So it ended up being Solomon having all this great influence over the whole area.
Of course, he didn't let any squabbling or favoritism come into play anywhere in the household, did he?
And in Chronicles, we don't read anything about that. So that's a good point. When we read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, when we studied that, it did talk about all the little people that disobeyed and went against what was going on and they had to fight with and all that. We hardly see any of that in Chronicles. Why?
Ezra wants to bring everybody together.
He wanted to promote the positive aspects of going
Yeah, come on, we're going to do this thing together. We'll get it done, yeah.
Sanitize history.
Yes, yes, it is. It absolutely is, and that's why sometimes, or many times, when we were in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, we referred to Chronicles for some details that he included that weren't necessarily included in the others. So it goes both ways. But yes, the chronicler was making sure that that it was a positive. Let's get back there and get this done. So that's the lens we're seeing it through. So when we were doing on the other side, when we were in 1st, 2nd Kings and 1st, 2nd Samuel, they revealed more of the down and dirty stuff that happened that wasn't so very nice. But here it's a more sanitized version. But we do get some good lessons out of this section. So we're going to start at chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, the place provided by David. He began building on the 2nd day of the 2nd month in the 4th year of his reign. The foundation Solomon laid for building the temple of God was 60 cubits long and 20 cubits wide, using the cubit of the old standard. The portico at the front of the temple was 20 cubits long across the width and the breadth and 20 cubits high." So before we go further, Moriah, Mount Moriah, do you know where that is? Yeah, I didn't know. You're smarter than me. I didn't know. I looked up this map. It's kind of blurry, but it's the map that I found. And this is a map of Old Jerusalem, and it has named like the different areas, the lower part of the city, blah, blah, blah. Up here is Mount Moriah, where the temple was built, up here. Okay, so that's Mount Moriah, the temple and the palace and all ended up being there. Now Jerusalem is on a mountainous area, a hilly area anyway. And remember in the scripture, we always hear them say they're going up to Jerusalem, right? So within this area that's Jerusalem, see the different little mountainous regions? It's like a hilly region. So they called that Mount Moriah. And I thought, well, I wonder what's so important about Mount Moriah. So I did some looking up. And I found that in Genesis 22, Abraham was commanded to offer Isaac as a sacrifice there on Mount Moriah. Wait a minute. So what's happening now? The temple is going to be built on that mountain. So isn't it interesting that when God told Abraham to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, what did Isaac represent? The promise was to Isaac. Ishmael was the other son, but the promise was not to Ishmael. Who are the descendants of Ishmaelites?
Those nasty people that still live over there.
The Arab nations, including Muslims and all kinds, but it's the Arab nations. So when we look at the Middle East and the conflict there, what are we looking at? The conflict between brothers, which can be very difficult conflict.
So in Abraham's day, though, it was a long journey into the wilderness to get to Mount Moriah.
From where he was,
Yes.
he had to make a long journey and there was nothing there. And he goes up on the mount, he leaves the guys down below and he goes up on the mount and he starts to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, which is really weird because has God required any human sacrifice? And
No.
God said
No, but God,
Isaac was the
God
child
had
of
told
promise,
him to do it.
and God told him to do it.
Yeah.
That was what was weird, right? So then at the last moment, what happened?
Ram.
Time out.
A ram.
A ram was provided. They did make the sacrifice, but it was with the ram, which was the correct way.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if this is going to become Jerusalem and this is going to become the Temple Mount, what do we see foreshadowed in the episode with Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah making a sacrifice? God ends up sacrificing his own son in this area. So it's kind of a lot of symbolism there. Also, in 1 Chronicles 21, there's a section. Remember when David was punished for counting his soldiers, and David looked up and saw an angel of the Lord standing between heaven and earth. This was in 1 Chronicles 21. And with a drawn sword in his hand, he extended over Jerusalem. Then the angel of the Lord ordered Gad to tell David to go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So it's like this same spot is where that see, it says right there, it was on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. That same spot. You remember the angel of the Lord was going to go down and kill the people of Jerusalem because of David's sin of counting, of not trusting in God, right? So when David offered the sacrifice to ask for forgiveness, then that was where he did it. Was on Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, Mount Moriah. That's the mountain where the temple is at. So it's interesting, the two major historical events that occurred in the same spot. That's what's interesting about it. Back in Genesis 22, verse 2, then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide, and to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies and their offspring. All nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. That was all the way back in Genesis 22. That was on this mount. That's the location of this promise being delivered. So it makes a lot of sense that they put the temple here. It was the place that the Lord provided, as well as the place that will bless all the nations. And of course, we tend to forget the one important phrase there, because you have obeyed me. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to keep that in mind. Okay, so back to 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 4. He overlaid the inside with pure gold. Now, I'm going to describe, there's gold on this, gold on that, everything had gold on it. The thing is that we don't know if they overlaid the entire interior with gold, or if the way that this is said, if it's saying like there was gold on everything, because they would like enamel everything that was drawn, or they could enamel it with gold. And so the pictures that I'm going to show you are going to show like everything just looks like a blast of gold. But scholars think that because the amount of gold that's listed here, they think that amount of gold means like that they put it on the, they embossed the different pieces that were there. So if it was a palm tree, you'd see the shape of the palm tree, but it'd be outlined in gold. And so there's an argument among scholars of whether it was all just a mass of gold everywhere, or if gold was just inlaid and put on top of the different
Well,
designs.
considering that they described numerous truckloads of gold that were available, you'd think they'd had enough to do anything with it.
Yeah, but I guess the amount that's actually here would not, they didn't think would be enough. It's about a 1.25 pounds. If you go to 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, over the inside was 600 talents of fine gold. So that's what they're wondering, is 600 talents enough to just slather the whole thing? Or what they meant was they put it on everything that was a shape, a design, pattern. So
Well,
it's
when you
not.
look at architecture that uses
Oh.
gold, it's not usually just straight up gold. It usually is like designs and things, because
Yeah.
it's more artistic.
Most of us, when we read it in English, we think of it, oh, they just slathered gold on top of everything, the way that it's written here. But it's like one of those things where you can't really tell. That may not be what they meant by that. So 20 cubits. Anybody remember how you can measure cubits?
Typically,
1.5 of a foot. Like if it's 20 cubits, would be 20 plus half of 20, which would be 30 feet. Aha! That's the measure in cubits. So this is 30 feet by 30 feet, which makes a cube, right? In other words, this is just as on every side, it's 30 feet plus it's 30 feet high. It's a huge cube. That was part of what Charles was referencing this morning, because we're told that in Revelation that that this cube will come and that'll be where we will live in heaven. So that's that link. So the link is here. You've got a cube that's in the center of the Holy of Holies, that main part. And what do we see? The shape of the kingdom to come in Revelation is a cube. And so that's this mirror image. That's what they're
And gold is also used in both as well.
in. What?
Gold is also used in both as well.
In both, yes. So in 1 Kings 6:20, we're told that the most holy place was a cube. So we were told that in 1 Kings also. In the New Jerusalem, there's no temple, but we do see in Revelation 21:22 the cube, the temple in the city, because the Lord God and Almighty Lamb are its temple. So the whole city is the shape of a cube, for the whole city is the most holy place. So it says the city was laid out like a square. As long as it was wide, he measured the city with a rod. So that's where we get the whole gold stuff. And cube. Gold and cube, that's the theme. Second Chronicles 3:10. For the most holy place, he had a pair of sculptured cherubim and overlaid them with gold. The total wingspan of the cherubim was 20 cubits. One wing of the first cherub was 5 cubits, that'd be 7.5 feet, and touched the temple wall, while its other wing, also 5 cubits, 7.5 feet, touched the wing of the other cherub. I'll show you a picture of that in a little bit. Similarly, one wing of the second cherub was 5 cubits long and touched the other temple wall, and its other wing, also 5 cubits long, touched the wing of the first cherub. The wings of these cherub extended 20 cubits. They stood on their feet facing the main hall. He made the curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarn and fine linen with cherubim worked into it. So the curtain separated the two rooms, but they also had wooden doors that came across the opening. So when they were doing the works of service, there was always the curtain, but they also had wooden doors that they would close over the Holy of Holies when they wanted to. 2 Chronicles 3:15. For the front of the temple, he made 2 pillars. Now pay attention to the 2 pillars. Let me show you a picture. Pillars. Like that, okay? It says, for the front of the temple, he made 2 pillars, which together were 35 cubits long, each with a capital 5 cubits high. He made interwoven chains and put them on top of the pillars. He also made 100 pomegranates and attached them to the chains. He erected the pillars in front of the temple, one to the south and one to the north. The one to the south he named Jachin, and the one to the north Boaz. Now, these are not names like Joe and Sally. When it says they named them because those names have meanings. So the pillar named Jachin means established, and the pillar named Boaz means strength. In Revelation 3:11-12, John is writing God's message to the Church of Philadelphia, and he says in verse 11, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So Jachin means established, and Boaz means strength. So Eve, if you can keep strong, be established and keep strong, and you'll be a pillar in the new kingdom.
Amen.
That's what it's saying to us.
Yes.
It's saying be strong, be courageous. We hear those words all the time. Be steadfast, and it's saying that's where you belong. You'll be like the pillars that stand at the temple. Here's a rendering. Look at this weird thing here. Okay, here you got this is the bulls. You got 3 bulls on each side, and so altogether 12. So that's representing the tribes. And you've got the bull for water, and they would use these for carrying water also. And then the fire for sacrifice. And then here's a rendering what an artist drew of the inside. See how it's all gold? That's what scholars argue about. How much gold would that take? That's more than that much gold. They must have meant that gold on everything that was, all the designs that were put in. I don't know. We don't know. This is what God made. Here's what God made. What's the problem with having a big fancy temple? God let them build this, and he said it was okay. But what's the problem with building a big fancy temple?
In one place.
Somehow you think that big fancy temple is God, right? Somehow you got to go there to be with God. And it's in one place. And where is God? Wherever we are. Wherever we are, he's with us.
And people want to steal the stuff.
Yeah, that's true. You put all that gold in, then you become bait, huh? Okay, now we're going to go pretty quickly through these next chapters.
Hold on, I have something to
Go
add,
ahead.
Laura. I'm sorry. So I have an archaeological Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and it says something about the pomegranates that I thought was interesting.
Go ahead.
I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says that ancient art made rich use of pomegranate as a decorative motif. In a religious vein, this fruit was used by Israelites as a sign of the fertility of the promised land under the blessing of God.
Pomegranates do have
Chains of
lots of seed.
pomegranates grace the capitals of the twin bronze pillars flanking the entrance of Israel's temple.
Yes. Pomegranates have lots of seed. Yeah, good. Thank you very much. We went through so many of the details on the decorations. I wasn't going to do too many of them on this
Sorry.
time, but that's good. I'm happy
And they
to.
actually found, they don't know if it was from the temple, but they did find actually a pomegranate that
Uh-huh.
was made
Yeah,
at one point and had engravings on it.
yeah. Chapter 4. He made a bronze altar, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high. He made the sea of cast metal. Remember that big bowl we saw with the circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. Below the rim, figures of bulls encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The bulls were cast in 2 rows in one piece with the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were toward the center. It was a handbreadth in thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It held 3,000 baths. So the sea was a reservoir of water for cleansing. It was what the priests used to do the ceremonial washings, and the New Testament views the cleansing rituals as a foreshadowing of the cleansing provided by Christ. We see that in Hebrews 9. In Hebrews 9, verse 11, it says, "In the temple of Ezekiel, the sea which was on the south side in front of the temple has been replaced by a life-giving river that flows from the south side of the temple." So this is in Hebrews 9, 11 to 14, where it foreshadows Christ's cleansing. And then we have Ezekiel using this as the life-giving river that flows from the south side of the temple. So there I have Ezekiel 47, Joel 3, Zechariah 14, John 4, and Revelations 22, all using that same symbolism of the cleansing. And that's what these symbols were for. So do you remember when we talked about how the Israelites walked around? Remember when they would move and God put them in order? Do you remember how they walked when they moved around? The tabernacle stuff would be in the middle, right? And then what would be on the outside edges? You had 3 tribes, 3 tribes, 3 tribes, 3 tribes, 3 tribes on each side. We looked at the tribes. The larger tribes were at the front and the back. The smaller tribes were at the side. So what's it look like when they're marching? From God's point of view, it's a cross. Uh-huh. They marched like that. When they camped like that. Every family had a part they were supposed to carry and take care of. So when it came time to pick up the tabernacle and go, every group had its job to do. And they would go do their job. In the center was the tabernacle and all that. And then they would move all together when they heard the sound of the horn. They would move together and follow the smoke, pillar of smoke and fire. So this imaging that we're seeing here is like that. The 4 sets of bulls, 3 bulls on each side. It's representing that tabernacle.
Well, did you notice how the circumference compared to the diameter of the circle approximates the value of pi?
Oh no, I didn't see that. Well, there you go. There you go, huh? Okay, 4:6. He then made 10 basins for washing and placed 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. In them the things to be used for the burnt offerings were rinsed, but the sea was used by the priests for washing. He made 10 gold lampstands. Go down to number 8. He made 10 tables. Number 9, he made the courtyard of the priests and the large court of the doors. And 10, he placed the sea on the south side at the southeast corner. Why 10? I haven't found an answer to that yet. If you find an answer to why 10, the original tabernacle had 1 lamp and 1 table. So why didn't they have 12? I don't understand the 10. Anybody know why the 10?
10 is the number of testimony in the Bible quite often.
Of testimony?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep that question open in my head so that as we read, if we see something, we'll go, wait, look, there's the 10 symbol. I was thinking 7 was the number of completeness, right? 12 is the number of tribes. So I'm kind of curious about where 10 comes from. Of course, it wasn't God who established the 10 and the 10. In the tabernacle, there was 1 basin. There was 1 gold lampstand and 1 basin, not 10. It's a mystery. Verse 11. And Hiram also made the pots and the shovels and the sprinkling bowls. Hiram made lots and lots of stuff listed all through there, and he made them very nice, all the way down to verse 18. All these things that Solomon made amounted to so much that the weight of the bronze could not be calculated. Verse 19, Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in God's temple. The golden altar, the tables on which the bread of the presence, the lampstand. Skip down to 21, the gold floral work and lamps and tongs. And 22, the gold wick trimmers and the gold doors and the inner doors to the most holy place and the doors of the main hall. So they made a lot of stuff. Now I'm going to try to play this video for you. This is a 4-minute video, and it is of the temple. I don't know if it's going to work. I might have to. We'll see if it works. No, it's not yet.
Started to.
Yeah. I think what I had to do, I couldn't get it to. It should play right on the screen, but it's not. So if I go back here. And then if I go out, this is the part that gets tricky because then I got to come back in, right? Or maybe I could just scoot it over. Okay. Let me see if I escape this view and then click on it. Let's see if we look at it. I'll put it in for
I think we could each retire quite nicely on one of those lampstands.
I know, that's
the whole
true.
group of us.
Yeah.
I have a question
Yes, please.
on the 10. Weren't the 10 of the tribes in Judah and the other 2 were Israel up north?
The other
There
way
were
around.
10 tribes in the north, but in the south were 2.
Oh, okay, it was just the opposite, okay. Because the temple is being built in Jerusalem, so that's in the south.
Well, yes, just barely.
All right, that thought didn't work.
Yeah, I know. I can't figure out either why 10, what the 10 represents. But maybe someday we'll know, or maybe not. I don't know.
There's something about Judah being better or something.
Yeah.
That's why I was thinking it was the 10 tribes there.
Well, if you find, keep thinking. Chapter 5, verse 1. When all the work Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought the things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold and all the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of God's temple. Then Solomon summoned to Jerusalem the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the chiefs of the Israelite families, to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. So notice they brought the tabernacle stuff, but they haven't moved that ark. Yeah, the moving of the ark is a big deal, right? People get killed if you don't do that just exactly right.
Not
So,
user-friendly.
yeah. Verse 3, and all the Israelites came together to the king at the time of the festival in the 7th month. Do you know which festival that is?
Passover.
Feast of the Tabernacles.
Oh,
Of Tabernacles. So, isn't it interesting? What's the connection between what's happening here and the Feast of the Tabernacles? The Feast of the Tabernacles was what reminded the Jews that God brought them out of Egypt and that they survived in temporary dwellings until he took them into the land he had prepared for them. So what do we see here with the tabernacle? The tabernacle, it's like making a parallel saying that the tabernacle was temporary. Now we have this temple to worship in. It's kind of that kind of connection. In Leviticus 23:42, it says, live in temporary shelters for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters, so your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So can you see the connection? It's not a direct connection, but there's like a little, you could see how it's temporary. It's like saying that tabernacle was temporary for us. Now we have this nice temple to be in. 2 Chronicles 5:4. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the Levites took up the ark, and they brought up the ark and the tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishings in it. The Levitical priests carried them up, and King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel that had gathered about him were before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not be recorded or counted. The priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark and covered the ark and its carrying poles. These poles were so long that their ends extending from the ark could be seen from in the front of the sanctuary. See what it's saying? The poles wouldn't fit, so they're sticking out the curtain at the front. But not from the outside, but the holy place, and they are still there today. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt.
Oh, so they lost the rod.
The tabernacle had been in Gibeon, right? So he brought down to Jerusalem. The ark had already been brought to Jerusalem. In 1 Chronicles 15 and 16, we saw when the ark was brought to Jerusalem, but not at a lot of hazard. It's a trouble moving that ark. You got to move it just right. So nobody's been bothered to move that ark again until now. So now they bring the tabernacle items and the ark to the temple. And they place the ark where it belongs, between the wings of the cherubim. The 2 tablets, what was in the ark before?
We had some manna.
Manna?
The rod of Aaron.
What was it?
Rod of Aaron.
The rod of Aaron, because it blossomed, that rod that blossomed. Those were the 2 items that they think were probably lost in the Philistine raids. because remember they captured the ark and they had it for a while, and many people think they probably said, "What's the stick doing in here?" You know, well, I got old moldy bread in here, whatever, manna. So anyway, so all that was left were the 2 tablets. I think Marvin, you reminded us that it was not very in Kings. We read about where they discovered the Bible, discovered the book of the law. Like they've been having these kingdoms go for hundreds of years, and they're supposedly Jewish, and they hadn't even read or seen the book of the law in so long they were surprised to find it, and then surprised to read it and see what it said. So. Verse 11, the priests then withdrew from the holy place. All the priests who were there had consecrated themselves regardless of their divisions. They names all of them, and they get out all their instruments. They make a lot of noise. And look at the song they sing. He is good. His love endures forever. We got that song. Then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. Remember that God represented his presence with them by a cloud of fire and smoke. And when they moved, when they were in the wilderness and they were moving, that cloud was above the tabernacle. So now the cloud comes in, so much so they all got to go out. It's too smoky in there for them. But that's God showing his presence there in the temple. So it's a way of approving that he's there.
So what were all those Levites and priests and stuff doing all those centuries when they didn't even know where the scripture was?
I think that's the question God was asking. You're just now doing this? Chapter 6. Then Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud. I have built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever. In other words, you don't have to stay in that cloud now. I got you a nice place here. While the whole assembly of Israel was standing there, the king turned around and blessed them. Then he said, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his hands has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to my father David. For he said, since the day I brought my people out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built, so that my name might be there. Nor have I chosen anyone to be ruler over my people Israel. But now I have chosen Jerusalem for my name to be there, and I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, you did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. The Lord has kept the promise he made. I have succeeded David my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel just as the Lord promised. And I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. There I have placed the ark in which the covenant of the Lord God of the Lord that he made with the people of Israel. Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel and spread out his hands. By the way, we're coming to the word hesed. When you think we read something that you think is hesed, I want you to call it out, okay? Starting at verse 13. Now he had made a bronze platform, 5 cubits long, 5 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high, and had placed it in the center of the outer court. He stood on the platform and then knelt down before the whole assembly of Israel and spread out his hands toward heaven. He said, Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven, nor on earth. You who keep your covenant of love. That's it. With your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. So, Octavia, one of the things we learned when we were going through the Old Testament stories is that there's this Hebrew word called hesed. It's little c, capital H, E-S-S-E-D. It's pronounced hesed like that. And what hesed is it's the word for keeping your contract in love. In other words, like marriage would be a hesed type of contract. You're making a contract or agreement, a relationship with one another, but you're doing it from a place of love. It's God's loving kindness. It's the way he keeps covenants. He keeps covenants with loving kindness. He is seeking for us to be successful in this relationship that we have with him. He's not trying to subvert us. He's loving us. It's not just a black and white agreement with God. It's also part of our heart. So it's kind of that heart part of it. So that the Hebrew word that's used for keeping your covenant of love is hesed. 2 Chronicles 6:16. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a successor sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me according to my law, as you have done. And now, Lord, the God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David come true. But will God really dwell on earth with humans? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Yet, Lord my God, give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy. Hear the cry and the prayer that your servant is praying in your presence. May your eyes be open toward this temple day and night, this place of which you said you would put your name. May you hear the prayer your servant prays toward his place. Hear the supplications of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. Isn't that interesting? And when you hear, forgive. When anyone wrongs their neighbor and is required to take an oath, and they come and swear the oath before your altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act. Judge between your servants, condemning the guilty and bringing down on their heads what they have done, and vindicating the innocent by treating them in accordance with their innocence. When your people Israel have been defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication before you in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the land you gave to them and their ancestors. When the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned. Now, does that mean that anytime there's no rain, people have sinned?
No.
It's just saying that sometimes God might shut off the water faucet because you've been sinning and you're not paying attention to him. Sometimes God uses those tools to get our attention. That's true in our lives too, isn't it? Sometimes God allows different hardships to come that he could have prevented. You could say, well, God could have stopped that from happening. Yes, he could have. So as Christians, when bad things happen to us, we know that God allowed it to happen. God allowed it to happen. Either we have a lesson to learn or he needs to use us in some way. See, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live, and send rain on the land you gave your people for an inheritance. Verse 28. When famine or plague comes to the land, or blight or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, or when enemies besiege them in any of their cities, whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or plea is made by anyone among your people Israel, being aware of their afflictions and pains and spreading out their hands toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Forgive and deal with everyone according to all they do, since you know their hearts. You alone know the human heart, so that they will fear you and walk in obedience to you all the time they live in the land you gave our ancestors. Now, verse 31, it uses several times, it uses this term fear, that they will fear you. I looked up that Hebrew word. You can translate it as stand in awe or fear. So if you were going to translate this into English, I would say here in this context, so that you will be in awe of him and walk in obedience. Or you could say, so that you will fear. In other words, if you have fear of the consequences or know that things could go bad, that might help you to walk in obedience instead of going off the wrong path. So take your pick. It's the same word. And throughout this passage, it's the same Hebrew word. So you can consider it reverence, awe, or reverence, or you can consider it like be afraid of the power. Isn't that what awe and reverence are? Is recognizing the great power that there is. So. For the foreigner, now who's the foreigner?
Us.
Hey, yes, that's with them. We're the foreigners because we're not Jewish. Unless is somebody here Jewish? Not Jewish? I mean, we all probably have some. We're all kind of mixed, right? So if you were Jewish, you would not be the foreigner.